Hi, everyone. This is Bethany Hale coming at you from Brooklyn. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Cedar. Thank you so much for joining us today for a Cedar Talk featuring Shan-Lyn Ma. I'm so excited. We just had a wedding on our team this week, and we could not be more excited. Cedar Talks is our thought leadership series focused on highlighting experienced entrepreneurs, tech innovators, and healthcare leaders who are solving important problems by challenging the status quo. Today's virtual event will conclude in about an hour. Our speakers can't see or hear the audience, but please feel free to use the chat function in the stage tab to post either questions or comments. You can just do a thumbs up emoji if that works for you. We'll plan to save time at the end for audience questions, and hopefully we'll have time for all of them. Before we get started, just a couple other quick plugs. First, if you like today's Cedar Talk and you want more, you can sign up for our mailing list or register for additional Cedar Talks on our events page of our website. The next Cedar Talk is coming up on July 13th with Joe Jimenez, who is the former Novartis CEO, and he's also the co-founder and managing partner at Aditum Bio. And you can RSVP for that event today in order to save the date. So secondly, for those looking for a new opportunity at a mission-driven organization, Cedar is hiring. So today we've got a member of our recruiting team available to answer any questions you may have on careers at Cedar. And if you want to get in touch and start a chat, you can hop over to the Expo tab and get a conversation going. So now I'd like to introduce this afternoon's participants. Leading this interview is Cedar's co-founder and CEO, Florian Otto. And I'm personally so excited to welcome Shan-Lyn Ma. Shan-Lyn is the CEO and co-founder of Zola, the wedding company that is reinventing wedding planning and improving the experience by combining compassionate customer service and smart tools and technology. Zola launched in 2013, and since then, Zola's achieved explosive growth. It's supported over 1 million couples on their journey from engagement to wedding and newlywed life. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experience, Shan-Lyn. Over to you.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Thanks a lot for the kind introduction, Bethany and Shan-Lyn. Of course, it's such a delight having you. And yeah, wow. More than 1 million couples and weddings. I'm one of them. So I just made it before the pandemic hit and was, of course, one of the Zola users and definitely fans. And I'm glad everything went fine without any rebooking. So Shan-Lyn, first of all, thanks so much for joining, and it's a pleasure having you. I think the audience is very interested in learning from you a bit about your background. Why don't you share a bit about yourself? And then you started Zola in 2013. So can you just tell the team on what drove you to start Zola back in 2013? Was there literally something you got frustrated with the experience and said, I can do this better?
Yeah, sure. And by the way, thank you for using Zola. I didn't know that. That's so awesome to hear.
Yes.
So a bit about my background. I was born in Singapore. My family moved to Australia when I was 4. And so I grew up in Sydney, Australia. And for anyone here who grew up in Australia, I think you might, or in a place that's very remote, you might sympathize that you feel very far removed from the action happening on in the world. And that's how I felt. And I'd always dreamt about being an entrepreneur. I had read a lot about people changing the world through building great companies, building great technologies, was reading a lot about people in Silicon Valley. And so I thought, I have to get myself to Silicon Valley somehow. But I'd never known anyone who'd lived in the US or worked in tech. So I thought the only way that I could do that was through going to Stanford, because that's how a lot of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs got their start. Now, of course, in retrospect, that was not the only way, but that was my kind of Australia view at the time. And so I was fortunate enough to gain a spot at Stanford, move to the US, and after school, was able to then work in companies that I really admired that were revolutionary at that time, which now is kind of a bit funny in retrospect because so for example, I worked at Yahoo, which was a company that I had long dreamt of working for, and then moved from Silicon Valley to New York to take a job at an early stage startup at that time, which was called Gilt Group. Worked as in product management, learnt the trade craft of product from great leaders, both in Silicon Valley and New York. And then, as you said, started Zola, so my own startup, with my co-founder in 2013. And so if you just going through that, I had always dreamt about being an entrepreneur, but it took some time. And it was really a question of when is the right time for me personally to feel like I can start something where I have both the skills, the experience, the financial security, as well as the idea. And so for me, that year was 2013.
Tell us about it. You can start a lot of businesses, right? The wedding planning business, especially being a pioneer there, is not maybe the most straightforward business, especially coming after something like a Gilt Group. How did you come up with the idea, and what really drove you to get passionate about it?
So, one concept I've been thinking a lot about, and I think it relates to Zola and the idea that we started with, was really how to create a prepared mind. And while I don't think I had intentionally done this in 2013, I had somewhat primed my mind through working in e-commerce and working in an e-commerce startup in the years before that, where I could really have a front row seat to seeing what are the problems or challenges that this e-commerce business faces, and how would I solve them differently if I was to run the company. Also, what is going really well that is really driving the huge success of this company, and how can I make sure that that is replicated in anything I want to do after? And at the same time, in thinking about potential ideas that I could start, I was thinking about what do I personally use as a user that I think could be done so much better. And that year was the year that I was going to a lot of weddings. I was buying a lot of gifts for my friends from their wedding registries. I was going through these department store wedding registry websites and saw these were just the worst e-commerce shopping experiences I had ever seen. And so through that combination of both my kind of looking at this product from a user perspective, as well as from a business perspective through my own experience, the light bulb went off where I thought, this is an interesting problem that is not currently being solved by the market. And so my co-founder, his name is Nobu, and I are the perfect people to solve this problem. And by the way, it's really exciting for us to want to solve this because it's just so broken. And that was how we decided to focus on the wedding registry product in the beginning.
I love this, and I think it's really inspiring of just seeing something and not being happy with the status quo, and then of course just through relentless execution, making this better, making this more consumer friendly, and somehow improving the economy and the world a bit. I think that's definitely a great ingredient for being an entrepreneur. In order to build a company, very often you, of course, need to raise money. And Zola has done that extremely successful, raised more than $140 million over a couple of financing rounds. So can you maybe walk us through the process of raising capital? You're a female CEO and founder. Very often, of course, you're dealing probably with male venture capitalists. Not everybody really understands the wedding industry or planning that well. Can you just maybe talk a bit about what were some of the challenges, the experiences, and also the light moments that you had throughout this process?
Yeah, sure. So one thing I realized is that every company's fundraising journey is very different, and every round for a given company is also very different. And so at Zola, that was certainly true for us. So I have experienced rounds that I raised where they were, quote unquote, easier than others. So an example of that is when my co-founder and I started to initially work on the idea of Zola in the early days. This was very early. It was pre-launch, and we started talking about the idea with Kevin Ryan, who is a well-known kind of entrepreneur in New York and investor in a lot of great companies, and was also the founder and chairman of Guild Group, where we had both worked. And because we had worked with him for years, when we told him we were working on this idea, he said, I love this idea. I love the weddings market. I love working with you both. I'll give you the seed funding and just get started. And so it sounds pretty easy, right? And relative to other fundraising stories. And when I tell this to other people, they say, wow, you were so lucky. That was so fast. And what I say is, no, actually, it took us those 4 years that we worked for Kevin at Guild, slogging our guts out 24/7, proving that we were good in order to get that very quick round done 4 years later after when we started Zola. And so that, that is kind of a unique situation that I think just shows, and I always encourage any potential founder to think about the people that you work alongside and that you work for now are your potential future investors and references for investors. And so, think about it that way. Now, in following that, we then had some, a few rounds later, we were kind of at the stage where the product was live, people were using it, but it was still very early and it was not yet kind of a huge, obvious runaway success that we then could show at the next round. And so we had a round where it took more of a leap of faith for people to say, okay, people are using it, but it's not yet everywhere. And that round was difficult because, as you mentioned, I was pitching primarily male investors who are primarily much older than our target demographic. So the VC investor that we were pitching at that time, the majority would say over 60 years old. And they just found it very hard to emotionally connect to the problem that we were solving and the need and the pain point, and would ask me kind of crazy questions like, 30 years ago when I got married, my wife seemed fine with our registry. So why do you think anything is different? Like, does it really need to be changed now? And of course, you would never say that about any product, but the fact that we got asked that question just illustrates how disconnected the investors were to what we were trying to build. Now, I think the somewhat good news is that these days, 8 years onwards, there's certainly more diverse investors. So there's slightly more female investors. There's slightly more diversity in the age of investors that someone might pitch, and also just kind of greater understanding of different needs out there. But it's still, not that diverse in industry. And so I had to learn over time how to pitch to people who might not be emotionally connecting to the product, but make it sound like a compelling investment opportunity nonetheless.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. And I know what you're talking about. When I pitched Cedar to investors outside the United States, they had no chance to really understand what is the patient financial problem and patient billing. What does that really mean? So it's very interesting and I know how frustrating that can be, and I'm extremely impressed by what you'll be able to do. And right now, of course, the business success speaks for itself, and right now it's very easy to define that. I would love to home a bit down on one of the aspects that you mentioned. So you talked about the value of building a rock solid business foundation with a laser focus on doing something, the one thing really, really well, which Zola did in the very beginning. And then I think in 27, you started spreading into planning, and then you did Crate and Barrel partnership in 2018, even went into brick and mortar business in 2019 and now Zola Home. Can you just maybe share a bit on your strategy on when do you think it makes sense to branch out and do something else to capture a larger market, to differentiate versus focusing on the core?
Yeah. So I think our strategy in the first 3 to 4 years was really shaped by our previous experience, where I had worked in a company that had expanded into new business units and categories very quickly, and I almost went in the opposite direction and thought, what if we focused on really nailing product market fit in this one product first? How would that potentially change the business outcome? And so the two things in the first few years that I was focused on was, one, proving that we had product market fit, which is do a critical mass of users both use our product and then share it organically with friends? And can we see that word of mouth and organic growth really moving over time? And then the second and equally important bit was, can we prove we have a business model that works? So before we get into new businesses, does our first business actually work? And so the first 3 to 4 years was really spent proving both the product works and the business model works. And I think that is actually a very hard thing for anyone to show. And so often I see people kind of trying to make up for the fact that a business model might not work by trying new business models before they've actually cracked one. Now, after 3 to 4 years of saying, okay, now we have something real on both the product and the business, we just kept hearing from the users, people pulling us into other parts of the wedding planning journey. We kept hearing people saying, I loved you for my wedding registry. If you could just make a wedding website, I could use Zola for both my registry and my website. It would all be in one place, and then I'm done. And it's so much easier. And people were begging us to do this. And so after 4 years of hearing this, that was really through the user demand that we said, okay, let's launch the wedding website. And when we did that, I was actually blown away and shocked by how quickly it took off. And the speed at which it took off made me think maybe we should have done it sooner. And so that year we launched that one product. It had a huge positive impact on the business, clear product market fit very quickly. So the next year we launched 2 new products, which were again pulled out of our hands by the users saying, now I have my wedding website and my guest list with Zola. Can I just save the dates and invitations that have the same design, and you send it to my guest list, and then I'm done? And so it was through this feedback that we decided to launch our paper invitations business. We decided to launch more and more. And when we did that, we actually saw the benefits compounded in the business. And so now the vision for the company has really expanded beyond where we started with one product, which was wedding registry. The vision is now, how can we serve couples from that first day they get engaged through their entire wedding planning journey and into their first years of newlywed life? And what would it mean to be that kind of single place that you go to do everything for your wedding and beyond? And I think, that only because we had that focus in the beginning could we now expand the vision. I think it would have been much harder and potentially destructive to try to do the full vision from day one.
Yeah, I think focusing on the product is really one thing definitely as a user, I could say you're really great at, and you and your team, of course, really excel at. So I would love to take maybe one follow-up questions on that, on your career. You mentioned that at some point, yeah, in 2013, you were ready to start a company with the financial stability and also your experience. You learned really the creating great products at Yahoo. You mentioned that. So what is the most important lesson you learned there?
I would say it was two things. One was looking at the market and the target user of the market, both from the top down. So from kind of looking at what is the total market size, and then of the total market size, what is the addressable market that we specifically want to go after with this first product. So just as an example, the wedding industry globally is 300 billion. In the US alone, the weddings industry is 100 billion. And then with our first product, which was our wedding registry product, we were going after, in that first few years, a $20 billion market. And so kind of learned that, how to think about that from the top down. And then the other thing, and it was how to then think about it in the other direction from bottoms up, which is the user mindset. And so for that narrowed down market that you're going after, what is the user mindset? What are their needs, pain points? How do we understand that so that we're not just taking them explicitly at what the users are saying they need and want, but we're also interpreting what they might not be saying, but innovating on their behalf. So let me just give you an example for that. One thing that we heard in the early days when we were talking to users about how did you feel about your registry? How did you feel about wedding planning? We would hear people say again and again in all these user interviews, oh, the worst part about my registry is when the gifts start to show up, and they just show up randomly, and I don't know what's coming or when it's coming or if it was on my doorstep and it got stolen, and it's just so frustrating. And I was shocked to hear this from users, because I thought, isn't getting gifts the best part about the registry? Like, why is it so painful? And yet people were saying it's because they have no control over what arrives, and then they aren't even sure if they want to keep it. And so then they have to put it all in their living room. It's overtaking their lives, and then lug half of it back to the store to return a few months later. And so that was an aha moment in that process, because it made us then innovate on the idea of a registry, where we thought, what if our big innovation is we only send something to our couples when they say they actually want to receive it? Which sounds so crazy and obvious now, because of course you should only send something when someone wants it. But at the time it was revolutionary, because no other retailer or merchant was doing that. And so we built in our platform from day one the ability for couples to essentially not send anything to themselves until way after they had come back from their wedding, when they were ready to figure out, are we moving? Do we actually still want this, or do we want something else? And they could virtually exchange things that no one had to know, or send it to themselves maybe a year later after they moved. And so this combination of kind of new features in the platform is still what differentiates us today from our competitors, which is also still a bit crazy. But it was things like that we did that really came from listing what is the pain point, but then also how can we innovate in a way that no one is asking us to, but we know we can really solve this a bit differently.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic how you mentioned that literally putting the customer in the center, and everything else needs to be adapted towards around that. And sometimes the very small and simple things that completely make sense in hindsight are being ignored by incumbents or the status quo. And that's probably also what you saw when you started the company, and you probably encountered a lot of resistance, right? When you started to disrupt this, and got a lot of doubters, right? This is, I don't know, this is too small of a market, it's extremely fragmented. people just getting married maybe once really big at least. So you always need to acquire the customers on your own. So what advice would you give to entrepreneurs who think that they have a world-class idea, but are encountering significant resistance or objections?
Yeah. So my realization after pitching many investors over many years is that every investor is really wanting the answer to 3 questions. And they ask these questions in 100 different ways, but really it's 3 things that you're trying to get across, which is first, why you? So why are you the right founder or founders to attack this particular problem and this particular idea? The second question is, why now? So what is it that makes now the time for this idea to be right? What's changed in the market? What's changed in technology? And then the third idea is, how much money is this going to make me? And that can be pitched in a range of different ways, whether it's the market size is big, the lifetime value is large, the competitive set is such that there's a real opportunity to disrupt the market. And so every kind of impossible investor question I found kind of boils up to these 3 overarching questions. And if you can articulate and be very convincing on why you're the right person, why this is the right time for you, and how this is going to be a very valuable problem to solve, then you've won the battle. Now, for me, specifically, the question that you asked around, a typical question I got in the early days was, well, weddings is a one-time thing. So is it really that valuable? Can you really make that much money? And typically this was from people that forgot how much they spent on their own wedding, because I think anyone that remembers how much they spent would realize, the average amount that a couple spends in the US today is $35,000 on one day. And that's the US average. So in New York, where we currently both are, the average is closer to $65,000 on one day. So that is a big opportunity, particularly when you put that in context of many other VC investment opportunities. That is a large potential lifetime value, I should say. And I think the benefit that we've shown and demonstrated is that with many other consumer commerce companies, you have to try to capture the lifetime value of each of your users over a very long amount of time. It's very expensive to keep bringing people back to your site and keep trying to build that LTV or lifetime value. And for us, while we really want to serve someone once, we're not in the business of hoping people get married multiple times. That's not what we're trying to do. But what is different about our business is that that LTV can be captured in a very short amount of time. So while you get married once, you also create a lot of value in a very short amount of time. So that is I think what we had to change people's mindsets about. And the other thing I'll say is that over time, what we've been able to show is we can extend our relationship with our couples if they trust us and we do a great job on the product. We can extend that relationship beyond just the wedding date, which is why we've launched things like wedding albums, which people typically do 4 months after their wedding, or honeymoons, or holiday cards, because everyone buys their first holiday card the year that they get married because you have such beautiful photos and you want to use them somewhere. And so all these things we've launched because they're still relevant to our core consumer base, but they are also helping us extend that relationship with the couple post-wedding.
That's awesome. Wow, interesting stats on the amount of money spent, and that's probably only by the couple. So if you add all the money spent by all the guests with travel, with
Yeah,
hospitality, with gifts, so it's probably more like $100,000 or so. Wow,
that's right.
that's a staggering amount of money. Staying close, I think, to the users is very important, and you advocated for that from the beginning on. So you said that you had a habit of talking to at least one user at least once per day. Do you still Are you still doing that? And do you still stay in direct touch with your customers as you scale up?
So I would say I try to, and then on the days where I don't get to kind of email or talk to or like ask a question of a user directly, I think there's other ways that I really try to put my mind in that engaged couple mindset. And so, for example, we have at Zola, we have a community of couples that are kind of all in the engagement and wedding planning process. And so I will go into that community and just read the different questions and answers that they're sharing with each other. And I love hearing what are the things that are on people's minds, and then what are other couples kind of replying to say, oh, think about this, or I love your dress, or I like this design that you've chosen. There's also, we're fortunate to have a lot of people giving us feedback through whether it's social media or directly through emails, where I will kind of try to interact and understand if there's any things that I want to clarify as it relates to potential future decisions we're trying to make at Zola. So a lot of different channels, I think, that we as a company are both hearing and talking to our end users about. And so if it's not a direct conversation every day, I am trying to still get that connection happening through these different channels.
Also should get easier the more and more users you are getting. So sometimes you're just probably meeting somebody who
Yeah.
used the platform, and you can ask for feedback.
Exactly right. Yes.
You're also very engaged in the community, and you're really passionate about entrepreneurship, and especially fostering women and young leaders to stay connected and to start their companies. Can you talk a bit more about your work at the Female Founders Fund and the initiatives you're working on?
Sure. So in 2013, which was the year that we launched, that was also the year that I raised our Series A round of funding, and later heard a statistic that I was the only female founder in New York to raise a Series A that entire year, which was very lonely, because obviously I think as founders and CEOs, it's already a lonely job to start with. But what sometimes helps is talking to people in similar positions. And so I didn't really have that in 2013, where I could talk to other female founders who might be facing kind of similar comments from investors that I could talk to. So that's why, I personally am passionate about and open to kind of sharing my experiences and stories with people who are interested in entrepreneurship through great events like this one. And so there are a number of funds. So you mentioned Female Founders Fund is one example. BBG Ventures is another example, which have a mandate to focus on startups that have at least one female founder. And while there's still not that many of funds like that, at least there's two that I know of. And so really, I will support them in either the events that they host or in kind of the groups and communities that they've formed of female founders to share, this is what we went through over the last few years. And now that there's, I think, been such an exciting increase in the number of female founders out in the world, but particularly in the US recently, that there's, I think, more, I'm more optimistic that with each year, the number that is able to kind of raise funding to go to the next stage of their company just grows and grows.
Yeah, it's absolutely shocking that the number is still so much lower than the demographics, because if you just make of course the assessment, I mean 50% of all the money spent is of course by default by female, and in a lot of industries like, for example, healthcare, it's even way more, and that means that a lot of male investors are just literally blind of the problems that are being faced, and I think female entrepreneurs are in a good position to tackle these problems, and they will face definitely a much stronger headwind with male investors, because male investors won't understand the problem. It's just the nature of it. When if it comes to, for example, a makeup, it will be very, very tough for me to understand this as a man, because I am not using it, and that's the same if people are just very, very different. And I think it's great that slowly it's coming. It will definitely take some time, and I think we are on a good path, but this battle is not over until at least it's 50-50, right?
Yeah.
What is the one or two things that you think, if you just could magically wish something, that would change to really improve this passion for investors to fund more female-led companies?
So two things. One is, I wish I could tell every female founder the advice that I only heard from a female investor many years into starting Zola, which is, I think the one-liner is from a female VC, which is, women pitch businesses, men pitch unicorns. Now, of course, that's not every single person. It's a generalization. But I think the line resonated with me, particularly because after one of the partner pitch meetings that I had presented in, I asked for feedback from a female investor who was in the room, and she pulled me aside and she said, what you don't see, which I see through every pitch meeting, is that male founders tend to, on average, be very confident and aggressive in their outward communication and projection on their business is absolutely going to be a multi-billion-dollar business, and they're banging their fists on their table and they're saying 100%, there's no doubt we're going to be a multi-billion-dollar business. And female founders come in and they don't do that. And in my mind, I was thinking, well, I feel confident this is going to be a very good business, but can I say 100% no doubt this is going to be a multi-billion-dollar business? I mean, 100% is like high probability. So I don't know if I can say that. And she's like, the problem is when you get 9 male founders doing that, and then you get 1 female founder in the mix in a day not doing that, as the audience, it does raise a question. Well, maybe they don't believe it. Maybe they're not going to do it. And so what that was just so eye-opening to me was understanding the context in which investors and people are seeing pitches. And so my advice to female founders is just know that's the context, and then make sure that you are projecting externally the same amount of confidence that you feel internally in your business. And when I was able to start doing that and feeling more comfortable bringing out what I felt inside, the better it was for my business. So that's one. And then I would just say the second thing is, you said it, Florent, which is the more diversity we can have in investors who understand different needs and pain points, the more diverse founders will get funded. Because while people objectively want to assess opportunities, the reality is that personal connection does matter, and understanding a particular pain point personally is important. And so, it's hard hard for men, most men to understand, say, a makeup startup, but much easier for a female investor. And of course, that's a generalization as well, but it is illustrative of the reality.
Yeah, that's very helpful and thoughtful of you. Would love to talk right now, of course, about the COVID crisis, which has been really ravaging the country and was a humanitarian crisis, but also had a lot of impact on businesses, especially, of course, the wedding industry. And you literally, I think, took lemons and made lemonade, so to speak, and launching an online vendor search platform. Can you just talk about some of the major learnings from that experience, and what advice would you give to other entrepreneurs or leaders who are faced with a huge change and have to pivot rapidly?
Sure. So yes, COVID in 2020 was a very challenging, hard year for both our business as well as our team. And the thing that I am proud of is how the team was able to pivot our roadmaps, both in the business roadmap and the product roadmap, very quickly to what we were seeing changing in our industry and in our environment. So as you can imagine, when the country and the world goes into lockdown and people who did have wedding dates in 2020, we could see on our platform, they were then starting to shift back their wedding dates to be either later in 2020 or 2021, this year or next year. And we thought, okay, with that shift, what does that mean in terms of how behavior will change? And what are both the positive opportunities that this window in time gives us, as well as the, I would say, reactions that we need to make that reflect this shift in wedding dates. So what we started to see was first actually people planning their weddings online. Even though they had shifted out their dates, the movement to online wedding planning was accelerating, which is not surprising. And so we thought that means there's a greater demand online for information about wedding planning and for people to research their vendors, like their venues and photographers and caterers. And because that is an opportunity that is interesting to us, we should accelerate our roadmap on that front. So we actually invested a lot more in building out our vendor search platform so that we could get more wedding vendors like venues and photographers onto the Zola platform much faster than we had planned last year, as well as built out the technology and the functionality to get that product to a live and into a great place much faster than we had expected. And now it is just going through the roof in terms of usage because of, I think, the work that we did last year. The other thing that we did that was more of a, I would say, reaction to what we were hearing from our users, they needed and wanted, was things like we built a Zoom wedding feature in our wedding website where people who wanted to have ceremonies and then share that ceremony on Zoom with their friends and family, they could do that through our wedding website product. We also launched change the date cards because we thought, anyone that had bought and sent out a save the date card with us previously may need to change it. And so we launched change the date card. So if you had purchased a save the date or invitation with us previously, you could design and print your change the date with us for free. And so we thought it was important to offer that as a free service because we knew how stressful and devastating it probably was for many couples. And so things like that, we also launched small features like the ability for couples to message on their wedding website if their dates had changed or what their COVID protocols were for their wedding coming up. And all these things together, I think, made me feel so, proud that our team was willing to let go of everything that we had previously committed to during the year and thought, no, we need to rethink what it means to be in this kind of new world of a pandemic, and let's not give up or take the year off. Let's maximize the opportunity. And because of that work that we did last year, I think we are just in a fantastic place this year. Wedding, not just in a macro environment, weddings are back, pent-up demand is all coming through now, but it is because of what we built that people are coming to Zola much more than we had even forecast, say, 1 month, 3 months ago.
Yeah, I think that's very inspiring what you're sharing. I can imagine things like, yeah, the Zoom weddings or the change the date cards. They of course don't really add to the revenue. They're probably even just costing development cost and maybe even some variable cost as well in sending out those cards. But there's a big lesson about supporting your customers and taking this long-term view of customer loyalty over the short-term profitability, which of course definitely probably took a hit for you. And what is the advice you give companies around incorporating, actualizing this philosophy into their business models?
I would say this kind of goes back to what I was talking about in thinking about starting Zola, which is for every quarter or every year or every day, thinking about how do you prioritize as a business equally what is going to have the biggest impact on your user, as well as what is going to have the biggest impact on your business. And if you can apply these two filters to your long list of ideas or possibilities, the things that bubble up to the top are the things that you should be prioritizing overall. And I think a lot of the work that we did last year was a run through those same filters. It's just the answers changed because of the pandemic.
Yeah, and of course the urgency.
Yes, exactly. I'll give you an example of one thing that we actually did that I meant to share that we also worked on last year. We didn't plan to work on was a home store. And the idea of, if people register with us and we can get great insight into what home brands and products people love, we can then continue to hopefully serve these couples as they move past their wedding date, often moving in homes, furnishing their newlywed home. We can help because of the relationship that we've earned with this couple. So we thought we'd always can do a home store one day, but it was never the right year to do it. And then, of course, with the pandemic, we saw weddings weren't happening, but a lot of people were in their homes and buying a lot for their homes. And we started to see through our data that actually people just buying off Zola for their homes, even though they weren't getting married, was going up. And so the other thing that we kind of ran through that filter in terms of what was going to have a big impact on both the user and the business was launching a home store, which we did, and then did in fact help kind of quote unquote save the year, where we were able to make up a lot of our kind of weddings business with a home business instead. And that wasn't something obviously we'd planned at the beginning of 2020, but it was that kind of quick pivot that allowed us to make up a lot of the year. And now we have a home business that continues to be there and helpful for everyone.
Yeah, it's amazing as a CEO and founder of a business to go through this, and yeah, definitely admire you for the stamina and having navigated with such long-term vision of the business to that, and that puts the company, of course, in a good spot right now. Would love maybe last question for you before we go to Q&A from the audience. Would love to hear from you maybe some advice. Our companies are more or less at the same stage. So you're around 200 people. We are slightly larger than that, but not much. And you're emphasizing a lot of developing a culture of collaboration and working with people you like, who inspire you, and tons of course, mutual trust and respect. We are definitely pretty similar, with one of our values being empowering people to act in their own good judgment. What advice would you give Cedar right now in the wake of our Series D, which we just closed a few months ago, around maintaining this kind of culture as we scale up?
Oh, well, first, congratulations on the Series D. That is very exciting. I would say on culture, there's been two things that have been very helpful in kind of the Zola culture world. One is never letting up or compromising on culture, even though sometimes it's very tempting to do in the hiring process. And I think the hardest bit about hiring is that often anyone who's hiring someone needs that person yesterday, and it has a huge negative impact for every day that you don't have someone in that role. And it's just so painful to hire great people, because obviously, if it was easy, everyone would do it. So what we have tried to do, which is not 100% of the time, but what we've tried to do as it relates to culture is for everyone that we're kind of bringing through the process of interviewing at Zola, we have someone that on that interview panel that is responsible specifically for screening for culture. And I think often we might say no to a candidate because, well, we think their raw skills could work from a culture perspective, probably not right. And it is incredibly hard to say no for that reason. But every time I think we haven't done that, we've learned the lesson the hard way. So that's one. The second is how to maintain the culture each and every single day with as many people in the company as possible, and talking explicitly about processes or systems or conversations that different people should be having on their teams in order to nurture the culture. And I think culture is one of those things where people think, oh, let's talk about it at new hire orientation, and then at the yearly meeting, but it's harder to talk about it every day and every week. And I think that's, in doing so, that's what makes the difference. And, by the way, just in the interactions that I've had with various people on the Cedar team, it seems like you have a great culture. So just kind of sharing what I've learned from my own perspective.
Thank you. Appreciate, of course, the kind words. Yeah, we are very focused on this, but still, it is something that I think as we scale, and especially if you scale fast, you even need to be more focused on this. And culture, similar to diversity and inclusion, I think is something that is inherently unstable. And if you don't focus on it, it by default drifts. So it is something that is very, very important to always keep an eye on. And of course, what you said is, I think, a very thoughtful comment of saying, focus on the long run, and in the long run is hire the right people and not hire fast. Of course, the best is to hire right and fast, but that is the nirvana you don't always get. We appreciate the thoughts there. So let's go to a question here from the audience, and thanks for sharing that. So have there been any thoughts to expand into baby-related things, i.e. announcements, baby shower events, and registry?
This question, similar to the home store question, is one that we ask ourselves every year. And every year we're thinking about, is this next year the year that we should expand into this area? Because this is also an area that we get a lot of requests from Zola couples who have used us for weddings, who then say, I really wish I could also use you because now I'm having a baby. So the quick answer is we have not yet gotten to the year where we've said, this is the year we want to do it. So I think we'll keep asking ourselves this question every year. And I'm sure there'll be one year where we'll say, this is the year. But right now, at least for 2021, we're focused on still, there's so much to do in the wedding planning journey. And just as an example, before Zola, couples had to use 20 different apps or products or services to plan that one wedding day. And that's crazy, right? It shouldn't have to be that hard. And that's why we thought, what if you could plan it all in one place? And that's what we're building towards. So we feel like we still have things to build in the wedding planning journey that we want to do this year. And I think once we're close to good on that front is then when we would start to think about baby.
Yeah, I can say that planning a wedding, even with Zola, was a lot of work. And I cannot imagine how people have done it before with 20 different websites. It's kind of the same. Right now you have the smartphone and you cannot imagine having lived without it.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
So maybe another question comes here. It's actually more about your partner Nobu, and what is the most powerful piece of design thinking wisdom that you have received from your partner Nobu?
The thing, so Nobu is our chief design officer at Zola and co-founder. And he is a design genius when it comes to user experience design. I feel so fortunate to get to work with him. And the question that he asks constantly, which then I think makes everything better, and I try to ask it when he's not in the room, is this, which is, can what we're looking at, can this experience be simpler, easier? Can we take things out because they're just not necessary? And I think, I've found that his constant kind of questioning in his own mind of his own work to be so powerful. So anything that he still designs a great deal to this day of the Zola experience. And sometimes he and I will talk about what he's working on, and he'll share things with me, and we'll jam back and forth. And he will ask himself, he'll say in this conversation, I'm not sure if this is as easy as I want it to be yet. I'm not sure if this can't be simpler. And just in his constant pushing for the most elegant, easy experience, I think I found it just makes all the difference in the world.
That's very powerful. Okay, maybe the last question is a little bit lighter in nature, but I think the audience is very interested in that. You mentioned your favorite wedding movie is Bridesmaids. Tell us a little bit about why is that your favorite movie?
Well, I think because I could not stop laughing the entire movie. It's very funny, and many of the scenes are very unexpected. So if anyone's seen the movie, you might have some examples of what I'm talking about, but it is a great movie.
Awesome. Shan-Lyn, thank you so much for being so generous here with your time, sharing a lot of your valuable thoughts. Really, really appreciate that. We learned a lot. I personally learned a lot. And thank you what you're doing for New York's startup scene, for female founders, and of course for all entrepreneurs and all newlyweds. Thanks a lot for taking the time.
Well, thank you for organizing this series as well. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you.